Introduction. About the year 1400 something happened which changed the beliefs and customs of many of the tribes of the southern Philippines and made of them a powerful and dreaded people. It was about this time that Arabian traders and missionaries began to establish themselves in the islands, and soon these were followed by hordes of Mohammedan converts from the islands to the south. Among the newcomers were men who became powerful rulers, and they, in time, brought together many of the settlements which formerly had been hostile to each other and united them under the faith of Islam. Those who accepted the new faith adopted the dress and many of the customs of their teachers and came to be known as Moro. With the possession of firearms, which were introduced by the newcomers, the Moro grew very daring and were greatly feared by the other natives. And soon they began to make long trips on the sea to the north and south, carrying on trade and making many surprise attacks for loot and slaves. At the time the Spaniards discovered the Philippines, the Moro were a terror to the other inhabitants, and they continued to be so until very recent years. They became ferocious pirates infesting the southern seas and preying upon the rich trade which the Spaniards carried on with Mexico. Stone walls and watchtowers were built at advantageous points to guard against them, but bays and creeks which afforded opportunities for lurking, surprise, and attack continued to be frequented by the treacherous warriors. Since American occupation, the waters have been made practically free from their ravages, but on land they have continued to give trouble. The greater part of the Moro now live in the Sulu archipelago and on the island of Mindanao. They range in degree of civilization from sea gypsies, who wander from place to place, living for months in their rude outrigger boats, to settled communities which live by fishing and farming, and even by manufacturing some cloth, brass, and steel. Their villages are near the coast, along rivers, or about the shores of the interior lakes, the houses being raised high on poles near or over the water, for they live largely on food from the sea. Their folklore, as will be seen from the following tales, shows decided influence from Arabia and India, which has filtered in through the islands to the south. 1. Mythology of Mindanao to Moro. A long, long time ago Mindanao was covered with water, and the sea extended over all the lowlands so that nothing could be seen but mountains. Then there were many people living in the country, and all the highlands were dotted with villages and settlements. For many years the people prospered, living in peace and contentment. Suddenly there appeared in the land 4 horrible monsters which, in a short time, had devoured every human being they could find. Kurita, a terrible creature with many limbs, lived partly on land and partly in the sea, but its favorite haunt was the mountain where the rattan grew, and here it brought utter destruction on every living thing. The second monster, Tarabusa, an ugly creature in the form of a man, lived on in Timachutan, and far and wide from that place he devoured the people, laying waste the land. The third, an enormous bird called Pod 3, was so large that when on the wing it covered the sun and brought darkness to the earth. Its egg was as large as a house. Mtintbita was its haunt, and there the only people who escaped its voracity were those who hid in caves in the mountains. The fourth monster was a dreadful bird also, having 7 heads and the power to see in all directions at the same time. Ntingu Rain was its home, and like the others it wrought havoc in its region. So great was the death and destruction caused by these terrible animals that at length the news spread even to the most distant lands, and all nations were grieved to hear of the sad fate of Mindanao. Now far across the sea in the land of the golden sunset was a city so great that to look at its many people would injure the eyes of man. When tidings of these great disasters reached this distant city, the heart of the king Indarapatra IV was filled with compassion, and he called his brother, Sulayman, 5, begging him to save the land of Mindanao from the monsters. Sulayman listened to the story, and as he heard he was moved with pity. "I will go," said he, zeal and enthusiasm adding to his strength, "and the land shall be avenged." King Indarapatra, proud of his brother's courage, gave him a ring and a sword as he wished him success and safety. Then he placed a young sapling by his window 6 and said to Sulayman, "By this tree I shall know your fate from the time you depart from here, for if you live, it will live, but if you die, it will die also." So Suleiman departed for Mindanao, and he neither walked nor used a boat, but he went through the air and landed on the mountain where the rattan grew. There he stood on the summit and gazed about on all sides. He looked on the land and the villages, but he could see no living thing. And he was very sorrowful and cried out, "Alas, how pitiful and dreadful is this devastation!" No sooner had Suleiman uttered these words than the whole mountain began to move, and then shook. Suddenly out of the ground came the horrible creature, Kurita. It sprang at the man and sank its claws into his flesh. But Suleiman, knowing at once that this was the scourge of the land, drew his sword and cut the Kurita to pieces. Encouraged by his first success, Suleiman went on to Mtmatutan, where conditions were even worse. As he stood on the heights viewing the great devastation, there was a noise in the forest and a movement in the trees. With a loud yell, forth leaped Tarabusa. For a moment they looked at each other, neither showing any fear. Then Tarabusa threatened to devour the man, and Suleiman declared that he would kill the monster. At that the animal broke large branches off the trees and began striking at Suleiman, who, in turn, fought back. For a long time the battle continued until at last the monster fell exhausted to the ground, and then Suleiman killed him with his sword. The next place visited by Suleiman was Mtbida. Here havoc was present everywhere, and though he passed by many homes, not a single soul was left. As he walked along, growing sadder at each moment, a sudden darkness which startled him fell over the land. As he looked toward the sky, he beheld a great bird descending upon him. Immediately he struck at it, cutting off its wing with his sword, and the bird fell dead at his feet, but the wing fell on Suleiman, and he was crushed. Now at this very time King Indarapatra was sitting at his window, and looking out he saw the little tree wither and dry up. "Alas," he cried, "my brother is dead," and he wept bitterly. Then, although he was very sad, he was filled with a desire for revenge, and putting on his sword and belt he started for Mindanao in search of his brother. He, too, traveled through the air with great speed until he came to the mountain where the rattan grew. There he looked about, awed at the great destruction, and when he saw the bones of Kurita he knew that his brother had been there and gone. He went on till he came to Machutan, and when he saw the bones of Tarabusa he knew that this, too, was the work of Suleiman. Still searching for his brother, he arrived at Mtbida where the dead bird lay on the ground, and as he lifted the severed wing he beheld the bones of Suleiman with his sword by his side. His grief now so overwhelmed Indarapatra that he wept for some time. Upon looking up he beheld a small jar of water by his side. This he knew had been sent from heaven, and he poured the water over the bones, and Suleiman came to life again. They greeted each other and talked long together. Suleiman declared that he had not been dead but asleep, and their hearts were full of joy. After some time Suleiman returned to his distant home, but Indarapatra continued his journey to Mtgurain where he killed the dreadful bird with the 7 heads. After these monsters had all been destroyed and peace and safety had been restored to the land, Indarapatra began searching everywhere to see if some of the people might not be hidden in the earth still alive. One day during his search he caught sight of a beautiful woman at a distance. When he hastened toward her she disappeared through a hole in the ground where she was standing. Disappointed and tired, he sat down on a rock to rest, when, looking about, he saw near him a pot of uncooked rice with a big fire on the ground in front of it. This revived him and he proceeded to cook the rice. As he did so, however, he heard someone laugh nearby, and turning he beheld an old woman watching him. As he greeted her, she drew near and talked with him while he ate the rice. Of all the people in the land, the old woman told him, only a very few were still alive, and they hid in a cave in the ground from whence they never ventured. As for herself and her old husband, she went on, they had hidden in a hollow tree, and this they had never dared leave until after Suleiman killed the voracious bird, Pa. At Indarapatra's earnest request, the old woman led him to the cave where he found the headman with his family and some of his people. They all gathered about the stranger, asking many questions, for this was the first they had heard about the death of the monsters. When they found what Indarapatra had done for them, they were filled with gratitude, and to show their appreciation the headman gave his daughter to him in marriage, and she proved to be the beautiful girl whom Indarapatra had seen at the mouth of the cave. Then the people all came out of their hiding place and returned to their homes where they lived in peace and happiness. And the sea withdrew from the land and gave the lowlands to the people. The story of Bantugan Moro. Before the Spaniards occupied the island of Mindanao, there lived in the valley of the Rio Grande a very strong man, Bantugan, whose father was the brother of the earthquake and thunder. 7. Now the Sultan of the island 8 had a beautiful daughter whom Bantugan wished to marry, but the home of the Sultan was far off, and whoever went to carry Bantugan's proposal would have a long and hazardous journey. All the headmen consulted together regarding who should be sent, and at last it was decided that Bantugan's own son, Balatama, was the one to go. Balatama was young but he was strong and brave, and when the arms of his father were given him to wear on the long journey his heart swelled with pride. More than once on the way, however, his courage was tried, and only the thought of his brave father gave him strength to proceed. Once he came to a wooden fence which surrounded a stone in the form of a man, and as it was directly in his path he drew his fighting knife to cut down the fence. Immediately the air became as black as night and stones rained down as large as houses. This made Balatama cry, but he protected himself with his father's shield and prayed, calling on the winds from the homeland until they came and cleared the air again. Thereupon Balatama encountered a great snake 9 in the road, and it inquired his errand. When told, the snake said, "You cannot go on, for I am guard of this road and no one can pass." The animal made a move to seize him, but with one stroke of his fighting knife the boy cut the snake into 2 pieces, one of which he threw into the sea and the other into the mountains. After many days the weary lad came to a high rock in the road, which glistened in the sunlight. From the top he could look down into the city for which he was bound. It was a splendid place with 10 harbors. Standing out from the other houses was one of crystal and another of pure gold. Encouraged by this sight he went on, but though it seemed but a short distance, it was some time before he at last stood at the gate of the town. It was not long after this, however, before Balatama had made known his errand to the Sultan, and that monarch, turning to his courtiers, said, "You, my friends, decide whether or not I shall give the hand of my daughter to Bantugan in marriage." The courtiers slowly shook their heads and began to offer objections. Said one, "I do not see how Bantugan can marry the Sultan's daughter because the first gift must be a figure of a man or woman in pure gold." "Well," said the son of Bantugan, "I am here to learn what you want and to say whether or not it can be given." Then a second man spoke, "You must give a great yard with a floor of gold, which must be 3 feet thick." "All this can be given," answered the boy. And the sister of the princess said, "The gifts must be as many as the blades of grass in our city." "It shall be granted," said Balatama. "You must give a bridge built of stone to cross the great river," said one. And another, "A ship of stone you must give, and you must change into gold all the coconuts and leaves in the Sultan's grove." "All this can be done," said Balatama. "My uncles will give all save the statue of gold, and that I shall give myself. But first I must go to my father's town to secure it." At this they were angry and declared that he had made sport of them, and unless he produced the statue at once they would kill him. "If I give you the statue now," said he, "there will come dreadful storms, rain, and darkness." But they only laughed at him and insisted on having the statue, so he reached in his helmet and drew it forth. Immediately the earth began to quake. A great storm arose, and stones as large as houses rained until the Sultan called to Balatama to put back the statue lest they all be killed. "You would not believe what I told you," said the boy, "and now I am going to let the storm continue." But the Sultan begged him and promised that Bantugan might marry his daughter with no other gifts at all save the statue of gold. Balatama put back the statue into his helmet, and the air became calm again to the great relief of the Sultan and his courtiers. Then Balatama prepared to return home, promising that Bantugan would come in 3 months for the wedding. All went well with the boy on the way home until he came to the fence surrounding the stone in the form of a man, and there he was detained and compelled to remain 4 months. Now about this time a Spanish general heard that Bantugan was preparing to marry the Sultan's daughter, whom he determined to wed himself. A great expedition was prepared, and he with all his brothers embarked on his large warship, which was followed by 10,000 other ships. They went to the Sultan's city, and their number was so great that they filled the harbor, frightening the people greatly. Then the general's brother disembarked and came to the house of the Sultan. He demanded the princess for the general, saying that if the request were refused, the fleet would destroy the city and all its people. The Sultan and his courtiers were so frightened that they decided to give his daughter to the general, the next full moon being the date set for the wedding. In the meantime, Bantugan had been preparing everything for the marriage, which he expected to take place at the appointed time. But as the days went by and Balatama did not return, they became alarmed, fearing he was dead. After 3 months had passed, Bantugan prepared a great expedition to go in search of his son, and the great warship was decorated with flags of gold. As they came in sight of the Sultan's city, they saw the Spanish fleet in the harbor, and one of his brothers advised Bantugan not to enter until the Spaniards left. They then brought their ship to anchor. But all were disappointed that they could not go farther, and one said, "Why do we not go on? Even if the blades of grass turn into Spaniards, we need not fear." Another said, "Why do we fear? Even if the cannonballs come like rain, we can always fight." Finally some wanted to return to their homes, and Bantugan said, "No, let us seek my son. Even though we must enter the harbor where the Spaniards are, let us continue our search." So at his command the anchors were lifted, and they sailed into the harbor where the Spanish fleet lay. Now at this very time the Spanish general and his brother were with the Sultan, intending to call upon the princess. As the brother talked with one of the sisters of the princess, they moved toward the window, and looking down they saw Bantugan's ships entering the harbor. They could not tell whose flags the ships bore. Neither could the Sultan when he was called. Then he sent his brother to bring his father, who was a very old man, to see if he could tell. The father was kept in a little dark room by himself that he might not get hurt, and the Sultan said to his brother, "If he is so bent with age that he cannot see, talk, or walk, tickle him in the ribs, and that will make him young again, and, my brother, carry him here yourself, lest one of the slaves should let him fall and he should hurt himself." So the old man was brought, and when he looked out upon the ships he saw that the flags were those of the father of Bantugan, who had been a great friend of his in his youth. And he told them that he and Bantugan's father years ago had made a contract that their children and children's children should intermarry, and now since the Sultan had promised his daughter to 2 people, he foresaw that great trouble would come to the land. Then the Sultan said to the general, "Here are 2 claimants to my daughter's hand. Go aboard your ships, and you and Bantugan make war on each other, and the victor shall have my daughter." So the Spaniards opened fire upon Bantugan, and for 3 days the earth was so covered with smoke from the battle that neither could see his enemy. Then the Spanish general said, "I cannot see Bantugan or the fleet anywhere, so let us go and claim the princess." But the Sultan said, "We must wait until the smoke rises to make sure that Bantugan is gone." When the smoke rose, the ships of Bantugan were apparently unharmed, and the Sultan said, "Bantugan has surely won, for his fleet is uninjured while yours is badly damaged. You have lost." "No," said the general, "we will fight it out on dry land." So they both landed their troops and their cannon, and a great fight took place, and soon the ground was covered with dead bodies. And the Sultan commanded them to stop, as the women and children in the city were being killed by the cannonballs, but the general said, "If you give your daughter to Bantugan, we shall fight forever or until we die." Then the Sultan sent for Bantugan and said, "We must deceive the Spaniard in order to get him to go away. Let us tell him that neither of you will marry my daughter, and then after he is gone, we shall have the wedding." Bantugan agreed to this, and word was sent to the Spaniards that the fighting must cease since many women and children were being killed. So it was agreed between the Spaniard and Bantugan that neither of them should marry the princess. Then they both sailed away to their homes. Bantugan soon returned, however, and married the princess, and on the way back to his home they found his son and took him with them. For about a week the Spanish general sailed toward his home, and then he, too, turned about to go back, planning to take the princess by force. When he found that she had already been carried away by Bantugan, his wrath knew no bounds. He destroyed the Sultan, his city, and all its people. And then he sailed away to prepare a great expedition with which he should utterly destroy Bantugan and his country as well. One morning Bantugan looked out and saw at the mouth of the Rio Grande the enormous fleet of the Spaniards, whose numbers were so great that in no direction could the horizon be seen. His heart sank within him, for he knew that he and his country were doomed. Though he could not hope to win in a fight against such great numbers, he called his headmen together and said, "My brothers, the Christian dogs have come to destroy the land. We cannot successfully oppose them, but in the defense of the fatherland we can die." So the great warship was again prepared, and all the soldiers of Islam embarked, and then with Bantugan standing at the bow they sailed forth to meet their fate. The fighting was fast and furious, but soon the great warship of Bantugan filled with water until at last it sank, drawing with it hundreds of the Spanish ships. And then a strange thing happened. At the very spot where Bantugan's warship sank, there arose from the sea a great island which you can see today not far from the mouth of the Rio Grande. It is covered with bongo palms, and deep within its mountains live Bantugan and his warriors. A Moro sailboat passing this island is always scanned by Bantugan's watchers, and if it contains women such as he admires, they are snatched from their seats and carried deep into the heart of the mountain. For this reason Moro women fear even to sail near the island of Bongos. When the wife of Bantugan saw that her husband was no more and that his warship had been destroyed, she gathered together the remaining warriors and set forth herself to avenge him. In a few hours her ship was also sunk, and in the place where it sank there arose the mountain of Timico. On this thickly wooded island are found white monkeys, the servants of the princess, who still lives in the center of the mountain. On a quiet day high up on the mountain side one can hear the chanting and singing of the waiting girls of the wife of Bantugan. No tales illustrate to better advantage the persistence of old stories and beliefs than do these of the Moro. They are permeated with incidents very similar to those still found among the pagan tribes of the archipelago, while associated with these are the spirits and demons of Hindu mythology. Finally, we find the semi-historical events recorded by the Mohammedanized Malay, the ancestors of the tellers of the tales. 2 First recorded by N.M. Salibi. 3 Those great birds are doubtless derived from Indian literature in which the fabulous bird Garuda played such an important part. 4 A common name in Malay and Sumatran tales. 5 Probably Solomon of the Old Testament, who is a great historic figure among the Malay and who plays an important part in their romances. 6 See Note 1, page 28. 7 In this case of a semi-historic being, whose father was said to be the brother of the earthquake and thunder, we have an interesting blending of mythological and historical facts. 8. Among Malay people, the Sultan is the supreme ruler of a district, while petty rulers are known as datos. 9. Here, as in the Tingguian lore, we find heroes conversing with animals and commanding the forces of nature to come to their aid.